So thank you all for coming. Yeah, let's move forward. I know he's ill, but I don't think it's actually contagious. Hi, thank you for coming. Welcome to the evening I call the Arab Spring in the New News with Turi Munthe. My name is Shumon Basar. Firstly, if you could please turn your mobile phones off, that would be great. Thank you very much. So, have you watched the news lately? War, famine, rioting, economic crises, make that crises. One is never enough. History repeating itself, as Marx would say, in all its tragic and comic fullness. The news amply reminds us on a daily basis that the world is a shitty, dangerous, and dysfunctional disappointment. How and why the world is such a pitiless shitpit does depend, of course, on whose news you're listening to, whose agenda, whose history, whose future is at stake. More specifically, whose picture is that? What were all the other pictures that didn't make it? If there's one thing that we know for sure, it's that the camera can and is predisposed to lie, which doesn't mean that it's incapable of telling the truth. The camera merely mirrors the same moral decision-making a human has to make. Once upon a time, not so long ago, one of the very last things that the West was able to export to the rest of the world was its moral superiority. Acclaimed news titles like the BBC World Service, the New York Times, Le Monde, the Spiegel, etc. embodied Enlightenment values, wielded sword-like truth, reason, rigor. This was media made to make everyone without a free press feel deficient and envious. And now, we're living in a time where our paranoia can be proven not only to be true, but often an underestimate of how things actually are. The very same technology and means of access that opens up reportage to everyone is, at the same time, we're told, killing off traditional foreign news bureaus. The term citizen journalism has entered our language, but is this better than that? Now, of course, turning such complex issues into simple dichotomies of old and new, good and bad, is a complete disservice to how we know things and understand them, and in turn what kind of intelligence, or indeed what kind of ignorance we might become. I've known Turi, we've just calculated, I think for 8 years. He was stationed in Beirut at the time. And I've seen him over the last few years start from scratch. I think a really fascinating operation, Demotix. And I think this operation Demotix sits arguably in the middle of these reference points, of these kind of traditional dichotomies that we talk about. Old and new, traditional media, citizen journalism, etc., etc. So I can't think of anyone more qualified to bring us news from the front line of news. Will you please join me in welcoming Turi Munthe?
So I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but I think maybe it makes sense for me to explain what I do, what we're trying to do. And then I think what Shumon wanted to do was to open it up to a kind of a conversation about what's been happening with the media, particularly in relation to what's happened over the last year in the Middle East, and understand how politics has expressed itself through media and how media has become as political as it has in this new way. So, but first let me sort of explain what this is. Demotix, I will never name the company again, but Demotix comes from Demotic, of the people. And the idea behind the naming was that, as you know, the Rosetta Stone sits not very far from here in the British Museum, and the Demotic Greek and the Demotic Egyptian underneath the hieroglyphs was what finally allowed Champollion to decode the hieroglyphs. The reason I will never name a company again is because nobody figures that out when they give a name, and nobody can pronounce it. But the idea was to create a platform for free speech and for a different kind of free speech anywhere around the world that didn't really have it. I'm one of those proto superior, colonialist, who reckons liberalism is a nice thing. So on one hand, there was a political project, and on the other hand, there was a journalistic project. Demotix really, I suppose, emerges out of a realization of two problems. The first is this massive free speech deficit, which is growing, and it's been growing over the last 15 years. Quite noticeably, Freedom House does reports on this every year, and has seen a number of countries that move from free, totally free, to partially free, to not free, to categorically no fun at all. Accelerate, and has been accelerating in the last 15 years. So on one hand, you have this particular issue, which seems counter contemporary in the way that we understand where we're going. And that interests me for some reason. And on the other, I'm sure you will all have noticed this, but the mainstream news has been going through a bit of a rough ride recently. And I'm not talking about Rupert and all his little devils, but the actual business of news. So, as you know, the internet and the absence of classified ads means that newspapers find it harder and harder to make the kind of money that they used to make. So much so that they now lose money. They lose huge amounts of money. Of the UK newspapers, the Guardian loses something like £100,000 a day. The Times is a massive loss maker. Even the Sunday Times is a loss maker. The Independent, as you know, is now a KGB agent or something. And the Telegraph just about is the only one just about hanging on. The same is true all over the West. All French newspapers are subsidized by the state, which is really clever if you want to render those two ideas oppositional. It's quite nice to have a state and a media that don't like each other, and one not dependent on both. Italy, you know the problems with Berlusconi, and the US the same thing. So they've been losing money. They've been increasingly cutting back on all parts of their business, but critically on the reporter, photojournalist, video journalist, who often gather news because they're the most expensive. A few years ago, when I was looking at this, the build-up to setting up Demotix, we realized that there were only 4 US newspapers in a country of 300 million people. 4 US newspapers that actually had a foreign desk. Not foreign correspondents, had a foreign desk, a group of somebody sitting in an office somewhere running a team of foreign reporters. Those are, for your information, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. It's not entirely clear that the LA Times will continue to have a foreign desk going forward. So then we may be reduced to 3. At the same time, there used to be 7 or 8 major newswires. The Associated Press, you will know, Reuters, the Agence France Presse, UPI, McClatchy's, and on. There are now essentially 2.5. AP and Reuters are the big ones. AFP potters along behind. But even those big operations used to have a man or a woman, almost always a man, in fact, somewhere around the world, have been cutting back. AP and Reuters today don't have a single staffer in 40% of the world's countries. So, what's interesting about this is that are apparently most connected. Our sources of news, in terms of mainstream news, in terms of the news that most people get, have shrunk drastically. And there's always a confusion in this argument. If you are obsessed with news and you're desperate to find it, you'll find it in all sorts of different languages, in all sorts of complicated ways, on blogs, on Twitter feeds, on Tumblr, on Facebook and YouTube. If you're really interested in news, you'll go and find it. You'll find it in interesting ways. But actually, 95% of people are not interested in news to that extent, and they do get it through mainstream news channels. So you end up with this massive shrink. I remember this becoming strikingly clear for me in 2005, 2006. Kuwait, at that particular day, I knew was having 3 things happening. Actually, Kuwait is echoed nicely today with what you've seen with the attack on Parliament. But this was a few years ago, and I remember that Kuwait, I knew was going to have, there was supposed to be a vote of confidence in Parliament. One of the groups was trying to push further kind of Islamist piece of legislation. There was rumours that there was going to be a palace coup within the family, And there was a bunch of Kuwaiti women who misguidedly thought that they should have the right to drive, and they were going to go protest outside of Parliament to do so. I knew this was going on because I had friends who were there. That same 200-word Reuters article appeared in the Gulf Times, through to the LA Times, and every other newspaper in between, with no difference to it. This is an Kuwait plays a vital role. It's an important country in its own way. Nothing there. So on the other hand, what Demotix, what we thought about was, could we not create a space which is as safe as we can manage for people to upload their stories, feed these stories into the mainstream media like an alternative newswire, and create a business from it. The idea of creating a business from it was that the last thing we wanted was to be getting government or other grants with all the political strings attached. And we thought that to become as big and as powerful as we needed to be and as sustainable, we needed to build this as a business, which is what we did. And the idea was twofold. One, to give a greater voice to these different new voices, and also to stir up a little bit the kind of news narrative that we get. There's a particular kind of story which comes from sending an American or French or British, predominantly male, journalist off to foreign parts to report on those foreign parts. There's a particular kind of story that you get, and you get a very different story, when locals are telling local stories through their own eyes. So, on one hand, this is an actively political project. On the other hand, this was trying to figure out whether we could build a network and a system, a distribution system, to tell local stories in local voices to the mainstream media. That's what we did. Demotix launched in January 2009. We launched in the middle of a blockade of Gaza, where only the BBC and al-Jazeera had anybody on the ground in Gaza. Because we launched a beta site about 6 months beforehand, had a few contributors in Gaza getting their stories out in ways that they'd never been able to do before. And then we really shot the prominence in June 2009, when, as many of you will remember, President Ahmadinejad suddenly got cold feet about this whole electoral business halfway through the elections, and called the election before the second round, with ensuing mess. Every single professional journalist in Iran at the time, almost all of them, was arrested. We have close friends who spent weeks in solitary confinement there. If they weren't arrested, they were deported. If they weren't deported, they had their equipment confiscated. And Demotix had 24 Iranians on the streets of Tehran shipping us their stories and their images via anonymous Google accounts, etc., that we were able to get out to the mainstream media. That was our first front page of the New York Times, about 6 months after launching. So now we are 3 years in, more or less. We have about 25,000 users, about 5,500 active contributors. We think in every country in the globe. The UN keeps on changing its mind on what constitutes a country, so we just say we're everywhere. And we license these stories, predominantly images and video, from local reporters, amateur reporters, local photojournalists and others, to all over the world. We have 43 partners who sell our stories and images around the world. We sell ourselves directly to The Guardian, into the US newspapers, Wall Street Journal, etc. And we have a big partnership with the second biggest picture library in the world, called Corbis, that then pushes the work that these people are producing even deeper into mainstream media.
Can I just ask you a question about the shifting of the various business models and economies that you touched on at the beginning? When it comes to, and I don't necessarily want you to be indiscreet with figures as such, but when when you sell pictures to a paper, you're representing a photographer or a journalist somewhere, are those rates the same rates that a quote-unquote professional photographer would get? How is that, or is that shift changing as well in relation to the fact that, I don't know, papers feel like there should be a different tier of payment?
No. So the answer is no. We sell our work at the exact same price as professionals sell their work. But this is sort of the thing which has become interesting. 50 years ago, if you had a camera, you were a photographer. Now everybody has a cell phone which takes pictures. And actually, what's happened fascinatingly with images is that the quality across the board has risen immeasurably with greater access to the technology. So what we've ended up realizing is that what sells is always quality. And it's either quality in the image itself or it's quality in the story. It's the difference of the story. So we don't need to play those price games, thankfully. I think it would be unfair if we did. But
are those price games are they naturally being played anyway because of the as you said, the hemorrhaging of the profits, etc., etc.?
So this is an interesting question. Yeah, I think obviously mainstream news organisations have less and less money to pay for stuff, so yes, there is a price squeeze across everything for freelance journalism, photographers, for video, etc., etc. I wonder whether your question pushes towards a space in which you can imagine only the concerned citizen would be actually a reporter, because there is no money to generate news, and that's something that we can certainly talk about. We're not there yet.
Because you told me, I think, once that you said citizen journalism, like you said, it's been around for 50 years, and you mentioned the Daily Telegraph, for example, 50 years ago.
Yes, exactly. So I suppose what we do is citizen journalism. What we're trying to do is citizen journalism. We're trying to get different voices access to the massive distribution channels of The Guardian or NBC or Figaro or whatever it might be. And yes, citizen journalism in a sense always has existed. Something, there was an explosion in central London 50 years ago. The newspapers would send somebody down to wherever the explosion happened, buy whatever film was in whatever camera happened to be passing by. So that's always existed. The shift now, I suppose, is in how much content, how much witnessing there is around every event. Every single picture that all the wide-angle pictures you saw of the Arab Spring, for example, of these public events, the Arab Spring, there's somebody with a cell phone taking a picture of somebody else protesting, actually taking a picture of themselves protesting. The whole thing is completely part of it. It's been yoked together. And that produces obviously different, and something that mainstream news can really tap into.
Has this made the job of the picture editor at a newspaper, for example, harder or easier, given that everything is an image already? I mean, and in a sense, you still, for a printed paper, you still have to choose the one image, or a limited number of images.
Yeah.
Most, I guess.
Yes, the picture editor of The Guardian sees something like 18,000 images a day, which I think would drive me mad. And has to select the very best out of the 18,000 images. So yes, there's an enormous amount of content now being fed through. A lot of it work that people like I do.
Were you going to show us maybe?
Well, I wonder whether we want to jump straight into sort of Arab Spring stuff, but just to give you sort of a sense of the numbers. In Tunisia, we had this is an old hub that I've just found. I've just gone to school. Apologies. I'm going to take the Egyptian revolution instead. So here, over a period of the first couple of months, we had 121 contributors in Egypt uploading 250 stories. And all these images being pushed through, suddenly you have access to a different kind of storytelling mechanism. And all these different kinds of voices that very much tell a different story. And one of the reasons that I find this interesting is that it's not just people like me and people like the protesters themselves who have got involved in this whole, who are excited about this new form of storytelling. Actually, mainstream media is doing exactly the same thing. 10 years ago, it would have been absolutely inconceivable for the BBC ever to run a broadcast with anything other than high definition, professionally edited, John Simpson fronted video. Now, it seems to me, al-Jazeera leading the way, but others also have gone out of their way to use the grainy cell phone images that sort of defined our visual sense of these revolutions and uprisings. And partly, I think that talks to a cultural shift, insofar as I think the news business, it has a single value proposition. I mean, their value is trust. Their currency is trust. The reason you go to the New York Times is because you trust what they're saying. The reason you go to your own Facebook page is because you trust the things that your friends who you follow on Facebook are telling you. That has changed. The idea that trust resides with professionals is now really changed. You look at this. I mean, again, the Americans are very, very good at studying and statistifying all this stuff. But the Pew Research Center, which is the big research center in the US which studies the intersection between media and politics in the US, does a yearly study on trust of mainstream media brands, New York Times, Fox, etc., etc., etc. They also have been jumping off a cliff. Since they started in the late 80s, there's been a complete inversion. I was looking at this yesterday. In the late 80s, the people that Pew polled, say that quickly, the people that Pew polled on media thought that approximately 34% thought that there was bias in or partisanship in the way that their particular newspaper or broadcaster represented the news. Today it's absolutely opposite. Today 66% think that the news sources available to them are interested and skew their reporting of events for whatever reason, political, business, etc. So what's happened is that as this trust in professionalism as a source of truth has diminished, what seems to have happened is that the shift has moved from professional to authenticity, it seems to me. And what you have with these mass reports, endless videos taken by people with their own cell phones, people involved in the protests themselves, people involved in what they're reporting, is that we trust what we see there because it's happened, because we're building ourselves an aggregate story from all these individual subjective perspectives. That's, I think, the shift, and that's what Demotix is involved in, but it's certainly also being taken up by mainstream media like Al-Jazeera and others.
I was going to get to this later, but it seems an opportune time to bring it up. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen it, but a lot of the discussion, there was a kind of news about that, the kind of ethics of showing that clip. But that aside, I think, and it goes to your point about authenticity, the real, which is to sort of think of it aesthetically. I mean, it's as texture. It's fascinating. There's no fade in, there's no fade out. The sound levels all over the place because the microphone, of course, on the phone can't handle it, you know. And so, like you say, it sort of it possesses none of the qualities of quality. But as such, it seems to me it's created a whole new genre of a kind of cinema also that happens to be news, that happens to be real. And I mean, it was interesting because a few weeks ago there was discussions here with various filmmakers and people who work on production. Very expensive on like Bukowski and Spielberg, all of this sort of stuff. And they were showing us, you know, this phenomenally sophisticated CGI stuff. But for me now, once I've seen this, all of that looks fake, you know, and weirdly cheap. Not cheap financially, of course, but cheap in terms of contemporaneity. And there's something extraordinary about that. Just as and I don't think we can fully process yet what, you know, the aesthetics of this image are, which I think is incredible.
I unfortunately couldn't agree more. There seems to me that something has happened with the internet, and it's gestured to by these dwindling trust in mainstream media. It's gestured to by the ever-growing acceptance of this kind of image, this kind of video, which is that one of the things that the internet has done is that it's allowed readers or spectators or the audience to get much more involved in the actual storytelling themselves. Not very long ago, you bought your newspaper. It was your identity. It was the community of which you were a part. You built your sense of the world through interaction with the op-ed pages, and with the news reported in the way that it did. You were a Telegraph person, you were a Guardian person, you were a Times person. Nowadays nobody gets their news that way. Nowadays people get their news in clips, in snippets, from dozens of different sources. And one of the things which has been interesting in my exploitation of a battalion of interns that have walked through Demotix is watching the way they process information and deal with news. They don't really read for the content. They're really reading for the context. It's a meta read, if you want. They build their own news stories. So that sense of independence and that sense that you have the right, that you are building your own authority on whatever story it is, picking and choosing around the place, means that actually what is important to you are the facts, is data. That is a piece of data. It's not a piece of produced work. And in fact, one of the pieces of the new media forms that I like best because it most perfectly expresses this is the live blog, which you see more and more of. The Guardian does it very well, the Atlantic in the US does it very well. But the live blog, in a sense, is simply an article which has been unstitched. You can see the entrails, you can see the blood and guts inside it. It's chronological. Inside the live blog you have whoever's doing it typing very, very fast. They're throwing data at it. They're throwing a video call from here, a Twitter link, from time to time a piece of staff reporting. But it's all there. And the idea is that they're just giving you the facts. You build your story. You figure out what's going on. It's been extremely good for professional journalists to realize that their audience can do a lot more for themselves. And I think the video that you just showed, from an aesthetic perspective, is actually what it means in terms of authority. You can see also text. You can see in the way people use Twitter. You can see social media as a form of all this stuff. And I'm sure it relates to Big Brother. And I'm sure it relates to an understanding of the real.
But how does that relate? I remember last year on I think it was the editor of the Telegraph, and he was on the Today program, and the discussion was about the what's going to stop the extinction of the traditional paper, and he said, well, in almost Darwinian terms, that business of where we get information or we get data has clearly gone online. But that, therefore, more than ever, his argument was that the kind of the role or the crucial and species-like role that newspaper had to play was that of offering opinion, and of so if we're being fired at from all sides, to the extent where we're living in a kind of undifferentiated morass, right, of information, that we need editors. Not necessarily. I mean, Guardians make it sound, I think, bring that whole kind of imperial burning thing, but in a very simple way, editors, right? Editors, filters, that, like you said, that we can trust, because what the alternative of that, and maybe that is it'd be interesting to wonder whether that's a generational thing, whether younger people don't feel that sense of panic, that what do I make out of all of these bits? How do you think those two things relate? I mean, that business of making the news up yourself on the one hand, and on the other, having the Paul Krugmans, these august voices whom we quote unquote trust.
So my sense is that an enormous amount is gained by this dwindling trust in professional authoritative voices. It empowers readers, it empowers people to go figure out what their stories are themselves on the one hand, but you lose a tremendous amount as well. You lose a tremendous amount if all that you have to rely on from a news perspective is the kind of video you just showed across all various different media types. And the reason is that most of the news that we get excited about is visible. The Arab Spring is visible, etc., etc. But actually, much of the most interesting news is often not visible. You can't show it. And what I think frightens me with this shift is the idea that we only end up with the kind of news that you can see. And that's profoundly problematic. And if it sounds absurd as a comment right now, it's already happened. Insofar as people put this date in all sorts of places, but there is a sense that investigative journalism died at some point in the late 90s. Nobody had any more money to pay for the Woodwards of this world to sit in a garage underground for 6 months listening to a chap called Deep Throat. And in the money, the resources, the editor's trust, the extraordinary amount of work to go off and do that, and the legal team, most importantly, to go off and cover that doesn't exist anymore. So increasingly, we are in a world, it's not quite that bad, but if you listen to Rusbridger, Pat Rusbridger, the editor of The Guardian, pat himself very firmly on the back over his role in the whole news, the News Corps hacking scandal. It took one of the biggest newspapers in the UK over a year to get this story noticed, to get it up with all the resources at their disposal and all the incentives to take down their rival, hated Blofeld opposite number. It took them a year to do it, and they know the police. Rusbridger kept on calling Cameron and Oswald. All this was possible, they still couldn't do it. So we are moving away from a verbal news, and verbal news which is extremely important, because it's most interesting. And my sense is that we're also we're allowing the traditional blind spots of journalism to get bigger. So I think the answer is there is no way that citizen journalism does news totally. You always need professionals. Ideally, you need lots of money for professionals to do the stuff that citizen journalism can't do. And you need editors, because citizen journalism, because the news is two things. On the one hand, it's news gathering, and it's those sources, and it's being there and being able to collect all this information. And two, critically, it's distribution. And right now, unless you're a celeb blogger called Perez Hilton in the US, some of you have heard of, very few bloggers have the distribution clout of something like the New York Times or actually any mainstream media organization.
On to the, I'm going to wait till this gets to the right place and then I might play the clip, but back to the Arab uprising of this year. Is it too easy to turn what we've seen in the Middle East into a triumph for social media technology over long-term historicity of, on the one hand, West Coast liberalism over the repressed Arab street? And maybe I'll just add that when the Iran uprisings happened in 2009, I was in Vancouver, and it was really fascinating because the story,
big Iranian population,
absolutely, but the way in which it would enter most dinner conversations was purely through the prism of Twitter, right? So, and at that point it could be owned by the West Coast, and Vancouver's very sort of Silicon Valley-esque, etc. And that seems to me that's definitely become one of the moral narratives of this whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's I think 2 or 3 issues here that I think need unpacking a little bit. The first is, were these things social media revolutions? Well, I should start there. Was the Arab Spring a social media revolution? The answer is absolutely, categorically not, on the one hand, and on the other hand, they undoubtedly were not only helped and pushed, but also formed and given their shape by social media, by what social media does, by the tech of it. So, Shumon and I have actually asked ourselves this question before. I, by absolute accident, was reading Eric Hobsbawm's Age of Revolutions in very early January this year, just before everything kicked off. 1789 to 1848. In 1830, the whole of Europe was under one enormous revolution. It started, there was the Carbonari in Italy, Prague had gone up in flames. They didn't have Twitter, they didn't have Facebook, everybody seemed to know what was going on at the same time, and it all popped roughly simultaneously. They were all as unsuccessful as each other, unfortunately. It took until later 48 for things to really shift. But you see that this kind of the contagion of revolution is something which spreads very quickly, and it's historically spread very, very quickly without such things as Twitter and Facebook. So that's one. Two, absolute, you talk to anybody involved in any of these movements and you tell them, you ask them whether this is a social media revolution, and they look at you with blind rage to say, do you not know what Mubarak did to us for 30 years? Do you not know what Gaddafi did to us? Do you not know what Ben Ali was up to? Do you not know who Ali Abdullah Saleh is currently, etc., etc. So there is Facebook didn't invent, they didn't get bored and think, I know what we'll do, let's have a little, what's it called, flash mob in Tahrir Square. There's reasons for this. On the one hand. On the other hand, one of the things which is really interesting, and interesting for people who work in social media and who work on the activist side of social media and internet, has been that Twitter and Facebook have formed much of the policies of these opposition movements. And which was fascinating about these opposition movements as they started off being was that they were profoundly Catholic with a small c, that everybody could get involved, and everybody did. From also, you see it in Egypt. There was the Muslims, all variants of the Muslim Brotherhood. You had all variants of the extremely fractious and fractional left in Egypt. All got involved. What's interesting about it is that they were able to build a mass popular movement without it becoming populist, with everybody being able to sit within their own tranches, sit within their own interests, and maintain those interests. And we see that still today. If you look at the makeup of all the political parties which are presenting themselves at the November parliamentary elections, there are thousands, I think there are 41. There are 41 political parties which are presenting themselves at the parliamentary elections. They have kept in those boxes. They haven't been subsumed by what everybody thought was going to happen, a big leftist group, a big Islamist group, and some version of the army's interests. That hasn't happened. That diversity has been maintained, but also this mass popular movement was able to be built. That is because Facebook has slices, and everybody can coordinate within those slices, and Twitter does the same thing. That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. There are all sorts of fears about it. It's very easy for a lot of groups to be able to come together for a common cause with a common enemy like Mubarak or Ben Ali or Gaddafi, or Bahrain or Yemen or Syria and many other places too, Morocco, Algeria. It's been quite exciting the last year or so. It's much harder to write a manifesto using Google Docs. So you can pull these people together. It's very, very difficult for everyone to get together and say, right, what should we have as point 1, point 4, etc. I like that because it's meant that we have got 41 political parties presenting themselves in the parliamentary elections in Egypt, and I think that's great. But there were fears that wouldn't work in that way. So yes, these new technologies have had an impact on the way these movements have run. And I think as a coda to all this, the other thing that to bear in mind is that talking to anybody involved in these things, there are two things which really, really, really piss them off. The first is when anybody mentions somebody called Gene Shah. And Gene Shah is an American academic who is supposed to, post facto, have invented the tools for these poor, blighted Arab Muslims to go and topple their dictators. And he wrote the handbook for it. I'm sure you can find it online. Nobody in Egypt had ever heard of this chap until 3 months later, when he came. He actually had been quite calm and modest about it, but everybody else sort of look at our clever Americans, what they've given, what tools they've given our Arab brethren. That's irritating, as you can understand, when a lot of people die. There's, in my mind, certainly a hint of that in these descriptions of these movements as Twitter revolutions or Facebook revolutions. And here, you can overplay the colonial line here very, very easily, but no doubt in my mind that there is an element in the discourse of these movements that suggests somehow California was exported to the Middle East, that Californian values have finally arrived in the Middle East. And you know, that sounds absurd, but you're not that far away from something which sounds a little bit less absurd, which is finally the Arab world is becoming modern. It sounds very different. It sort of means a bit the same thing. There's another phrase which was bandied about a lot at this time in February, March, and thereafter, was that suddenly the Arab world had found its face. Face to perhaps some people in California, but that phrasing points exactly to the way these movements was understood. Americans, Brits a bit less, but French certainly. The West really understands the big bastard, lots of little people toppling the big bastard and finding freedom and true love. House at the end of the prairie, whatever it is. American independence is exactly that story, with a crazy king here in the UK. French, with a crazy king in France. It's a narrative that we all understand. What's interesting is that the Arab Spring, it's so direct, it was exactly the same narrative, and it worked perfectly with it. And on top of it, finally, for the first time, we had pictures of young Muslim men who didn't have long beards, with kaftans, turbans, and kalashnikovs, looking like Dolce & Gabbana models, etched against the Afghan sunset. They were on cell phones, they were wearing Converse, they were pissed off in the same way that the people who watch this stuff on TV's children were pissed off. So there's an appropriation story going on, without question, in the term Facebook or Twitter.
When Mubarak's government switched off the internet during the uprisings, it signalled an understanding of the kind of infrastructural underpinnings of this new information technology. How do you foresee the war on free information becoming more advanced and sophisticated, or are those with something to hide fighting a kind of unwinnable battle?
We are all fighting an unwinnable battle against Google, but that's another completely different question.
Expand.
They know what you're doing, and they know probably what you're doing next year, and they probably know where you'll go on holiday in 5 years' time, better than you do. They know it now. Google aside, helping people that they are, the fight between free speech activists and their technology and oppressive controlling governments is not really a battle. It's not a battle. I think we've described it in the past as a cat and mouse game. People will figure out a piece of technology which allows you to get through kind of internet censorship in Zimbabwe, and say Iran, say China, say elsewhere, and the government will figure out a way of blocking that particular loophole. It really is a cat and mouse game, and it will continue to be a cat and mouse game. There are an enormous number of very, very, very smart, highly committed, very brave people involved in trying to secure the internet and keeping it open. Especially in these more oppressive regimes. Yeah, exactly. But it's never shows like keys. It's never one. So it continues to play itself out forever.
Just in relation to that, there were, Julian Assange said in an interview a couple of months ago something very interesting, which was that some of the most important information that was being distributed during the Egyptian revolution were actually in pamphlet form, and they were being circulated through youth soccer clubs, and which is super interesting because it suggests that a return that actually print is possibly what happens after is much safer.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to switch off by simply turning a network off, etc., etc. I find that really fascinating.
There's this wonderful story. So on the day that Mubarak turned the internet off, I love that idea, don't you? I can just switch it off. Right, you've been playing enough, children. So on the day that you switched the internet off, the day the music died, Jackie Rowland, who's the al-Jazeera, English al-Jazeera correspondent, who was there at the time, said it was fascinating. What happened is that all these people, all these actually Twitter activists, the Twitter Tahriris or whatever it is, they couldn't get any information from Twitter anymore. So they went down into the streets, which is called protesting. So, you know, had the opposite effect. I think clearly clearly it's a complicated game. Clearly also you have to be Mubarak to be able to turn the internet off. Most people can't do that, thank God. But also most governments can't do that for the simple reason that my understanding was that when the internet was slowed in June 2009 in Iran, over a period of about 5 days, 6 days actually, but very, very drastically. So I think the estimates was they lost $2.5 billion in revenue just from incapable of producing, who's doing any transactions. It costs a lot of money. And when it costs a lot of money, it also pisses a whole bunch of people off. And the people it tends to piss off are in Iran, it was, the suggestion was it was the bazaars, it was the merchants, it was the people who just really wanted calm. Just get on with their daily business. It pissed them off. You don't want to piss off those people who are predominantly on your side, and ditto in Egypt, actually, as well. So there is a very soundbitey new media guru called Clay Shirky, based in the US, who calls this the dictators dilemma. I don't know whether it is the dictators dilemma or not, but it's problematic. Not everybody can get away with it.
And, with regards to Syria, what is Demotix's activity or relationship to Syrian producers of news and images been over the last few months?
We've failed. We've really failed in Syria, and Syria is a very particular case in point. I used to live in Syria, and I studied Arabic there when I was 20, 21, and there were 12 branches of the Mukhabarat, which is the secret police there. There still are. It's one of the most surveilled countries in the Middle East, much worse than Egypt, much worse than Tunisia, much worse, probably even than Libya. I mean, it's on a par with Iraq in the 80s, and it's a much smaller country. So there is absolute terror in Syria, and there is also no clear sense of resolution. So one of the things that we found is that there are two sort of official YouTube voices on Syria. One of them is called Sham TV, and one is called Syrian News Network or something. They are taking video footage from people in demonstrations in Homs or Hamal, wherever it might be, and feeding it onto YouTube and pushing it out. But they're anonymizing all that work themselves, and they're doing it as Sham TV. And one of the reasons that's happening, one of the reasons it's been so hard to get any stuff out, any material out, is that there is this terrible fear of retribution. It's not clear by any means that Assad is going to get toppled. So the fear is how this material comes, how we push it. But the retribution, if it doesn't go the way they hope, it will be terrible. So people are very, very reluctant to put their names to anything. What we've been getting actually in the opposite, which is our contributors in the masses desperate to go and shoot something. They're shooting pro-Assad rallies, which we get. We've got a lot of pro-Assad stuff. We know who all those are. There's irony. I know because we've been in touch with this issue. There's enormous sort of blood-soaked irony in the fact that this is all very multi-centered. But Syria's been horrible. Syria's been a perfect example of what the cyber dystopians, of whom there are lots, would say, tank versus Twitter is a no-brainer. All it takes really is a massive escalation of violence for most regimes to stay in power. One thing that's just been extraordinary over the last year has been, revolutions have the same sort of success rates as very high-end restaurants. They all don't work. None of them work. They fold immediately. We've had a whole bunch of successes this year. It's been the year of the Mishnah. I stop that now. But most of the time they don't work. And most of the time, even if they initially work, or they seem to work insofar as they've got rid of the bogeyman, they take a very long time to play out. Yep, Syria's been a disaster from that perspective. It's half-baked disaster.
Gina Fakhri, who's one of the anchors for al-Jazeera, she told me once that it was watching the first Gulf War that made her want to become a journalist, a TV correspondent. And she also said that it's during the war that news channels are really put to the test. These uprisings, which we're talking about, which are multi-locational, complicated, with complicated subplots, essential nuance differences in their reasons and agendas. What kind of challenges have they and the arrival of, say, WikiLeaks posed to both traditional news media and, say, your own area of news mediation. Where do you think things have worked, and where do you think they're failing?
That's a very interesting question. I would have sort of started from the opposite perspective. I think the great problem of this sort of collective, collaborative citizen media, and you suggested to it with what you were saying about Iran in 2009, is that actually you build a dominant narrative very, very quickly. The Arab Spring had its narrative immediately, and it was American war against independence against Mad King George, sort of, very, very quickly. That's exactly what the story was. Iran in 2009, much more complicated. Something like 0.02% of the Iranian population has ever heard of Twitter or spell it. And yet, the world and our news channels was awash with these tweets, billions of tweets about Iran, about Tehran, about Isfahan, etc. Started off with the 4 people in Tehran that were tweeting, and then it went on to the Iranian diaspora, and then it went out even further, and it became this mass armchair Twitter revolution. Everybody felt they were doing their bit by retweeting. It sounds ridiculous, and it was ridiculous. You don't run a revolution by retweeting, and that's the sense that there was in Iran. And in Iran, it's absolutely by no means clear, others of you here will know better than me, but it was by no means clear that Ahmadinejad would not have won the elections had there been a second round. Very, very, very complicated situation. But you had Ian Black and the Guardian going there saying absolutely he stole the election, we would have a different government, we would have a different regime here. Based on absolutely nothing but hearing this dominant narrative and whipping it up and getting overexcited by it. So I think that's the thing, the problem is that these conferences about the Arab Spring, they fail to differentiate between it. Libya is a completely different story and a different country, obviously from Tunisia, which is a different place from Egypt. I'm saying something very banal, but it's often not said. There is this sense of the Twitter or Facebook revolution is as crass an idea as the Arab Spring. And I think that is problematic. When a lot of people can get involved in the news, it can get away with the editors of it. And you see this now in the way news is distributed more generally, ignoring the Arab Spring. But back in the day, when you had a newspaper, and you were a newspaper owner or editor, you chose what your front page was. You decided that Clegg and Cameron's latest saunter in the woods was front page news, and it was front page news. Nowadays, because it's all on the web, actually your readers choose what the front page is. They choose what will be most read, and they actually print it themselves. Insofar as if they retweet or Facebook link to an article about J-Lo and Rihanna going for a saunter in their woods, and they push it out, they are actually printing it, they're distributing it, they are making your front page. That is your lead story, and that's, I think, part of the problem. This is what a lot of old school journalists talk about as this sort of lowest common denominatorism. Sorry. It's the reason I no longer write that. Happening in subsequent news distribution.
Are there any questions? Comments?
Do you advertise?
You shout out, please.
Do you advertise? Your website?
No. All our contributors hear about us word of mouth. Really. We're about to bring on advertising onto the website and split the revenues and give pretty much all the revenues to our contributors because we're getting popular. Yes. Do you want to run?
I just wanted to return to something you said earlier, which was at the piece of footage that you showed earlier. You said this is a piece of data and it's not produced. And I wanted to kind of question that a bit more about the manufacture of the images that you receive, and whether you kind of question, there is a particular kind of imagery that you're talking about, and I guess I'm interested in whether you ever question whether these images are produced for you, whether there is an incentive for the people with the cameras to, in fact, manufacture something with an awareness of what sells or what you buy. And I think that is a piece of footage where that question, for me, is very, very poignant. The presence of those cameras, exactly was captured with that. Kind of question whether that changed the course of events or not. And I just, wonder whether it's something that comes up in your work. You look out for manufactured images or the huge
So we absolutely do.
Yeah, or whether you think that it changed because of events as well. Visually, I'm not talking about Twitter and other things, but the visual capture of imagery might make people behave in a way different than they have done, for good and bad.
So to answer the first question, and I think this is sort of the overarching principle, or the way that I see the interaction between citizen media, or citizens collecting media and an audience, is you always need an editor. So we have an editor 24/7 around the globe. We have 6 that looks at every single image that comes our way. One, checking that it says that what it is, that it's true, and 2, looking at it from exactly that perspective. You don't need to lie. You don't need to Photoshop an image to make it lie, obviously. So yes, we do think about that very, 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 very carefully. As to whether images have an impact on history, I think yes, absolutely.
Not so much that images have an impact on history, but the presence of cameras.
Oh, yes.
I
No,
guess
this,
that's something that kind of actually facilitates an event, or actually brings an event on. That's what my first thought was when I saw that footage for the first time. It's like, well,
do you think, are you asking, would Gaddafi have been killed if we couldn't have videoed it?
basically, I'm not making a moral judgment about whether
Yeah.
he should have gone to trial or not, but did the presence of those cameras and the capturing of that footage and knowing that they'd get that image and that would be the thing that went around the world, would that have changed potentially that given scenario?
That's a huge question. That's an absolutely huge question, and I don't know.
I'm not asking you for
Yeah, exactly. So let me tell you.
Yeah.
I think it's an absolutely fascinating question. My gut instinct now is that people use their cell phone camera still differently. There's an idea of owning something, right? So people use their camera to own events, to record. It's a new memory form, I think, and I think that's the dominant approach to everybody constantly filming everything, to almost own it themselves, is to sort of fix that memory. Because our memories also get worse, so fixing it somewhere we can restore it, so we can find it later. My sense from this, and also from how very popular Gaddafi was, is that he'd have been novel with or without images around it, and with or without people being people filming. Yes, very good question. Do we get to a point where suddenly everybody's thinking about, would this make good cinema? When your primary vision is actually back at home on your laptop, when your primary vision is as a broadcaster.
I think that's already happened.
You may be right.
But it's an interesting question. If you, I remember Jon Snow telling a funny story about when he was filming the Russians invading Afghanistan, that you just sat there for months, no one doing anything, and when he turned up with a camera, they'd all sort of run around. And then he'd stop, and you'd all go back to work. So when there was just one camera, it was, and I'm just sort of wondering that if that was when the only way to get on the news was by the only camera within a 5-mile radius. You know, it's sort of an interesting, that's when most in the other direction. Now there are lots of them, and maybe they're like, okay, maybe we actually have to do some work because everyone's watching.
Can everyone be part of your, can everyone upload news?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then how do you decide whether this is true or it can be a fake news too?
So it's a boring answer, but we do a lot of work technically. So we can, in every image and video, there's metadata which will give you time tags and often the geotags within the image itself, and we test those against what people have told us. And then we also keep a very close eye on our contributors. So there are certain people on Demotix who've uploaded 500 stories, tens of thousands of images. They tend not to lie, they tend not to be interested in lying.
So you have people all around the world giving you the news feeds.
Yeah.
Thanks, it's a very thought-provoking presentation. My question's a little bit later, I'm afraid, so thank you both. It's simply, what percentage of the footage and coverage appears on the website, or do you say is the cream of the crop for the newspapers? Do you sort of sell the press in order to make it viable commercial concern, pay the bills and whatever? Do you sell the best to the newspapers and the other outlets? And then, or after the sell-by date, is everything available for the general public to see?
No, we're very naughty. We put everything up on Demotix.
Everything?
Everything's up on Demotix. Our very best family jewels are up on Demotix. And we sell them we sell it. The problem is going to be, he says pompously, when we get so popular that we compete with mainstream media, but that will almost certainly never happen. But I mean, it could be, at which point, how we run it, and then we have a potentially different business model, which I would love, by the way. One of the things which is so difficult about what we do is that also we have to follow mainstream news agenda. So this is a story which I tell all the time because it irritates me so much. About 6 months ago, a bit more, about 9 months ago, one of our contributors in Somalia managed to get do a quasi-embed with the Shabab militia in Mogadishu, and walking around with them in suburbs of Mogadishu, took a whole series of fabulous pictures. Extraordinary stuff. On the same day, one of our UK contributors went to Westminster, sat outside Downing Street, nothing happened, was pottering back through St James's Park when he saw a bloke on a bench with a pelican. The pelican pictures we sell to every single UK newspaper except The Guardian. And the Shabab militia is gathering digital dust somewhere on Earth. So, are we succeeding in telling? I mean, that's I suppose the question that I ask myself often is: are we succeeding in our initial mission to alter or expand the news narrative, I suppose? And the answer is probably not right now. And the reason that's probably not is because yes, every so often we're able to get a particular image or particular videos, which changes. Tells a slightly different story. But otherwise, because we're selling into mainstream media, and mainstream media is as constrained or more constrained by its demands of its audience, they often can't be very brave. So one of the things which interests me as we become more popular, we get 1.2, 1.3 million visits a month now, which is viable from a commercial perspective. But as we grow, we start becoming a way for people to make money from their work because we will give all the advertising revenue to our contributors. And at that point, the Shabab militia story sits front and center of our webpage and generates real money for our contributor in Mogadishu.
How do you keep people safe? Do people send you stuff from Iran, for instance? How can you say you have safe places where they send it to that they can't be found out? It must be very dangerous to send you stuff from certain places.
It is. I was at the Rory Peck Trust Awards last night, honouring freelancers who try to do this work. And this is actually one of probably the most important shift that has taken place in the new news environment. Is back in the old day, just newspapers and broadcasters had their own staff. They were fully insured. They could call up the Secretary of State or the Ministry of Defence or whatever and try and figure them, and they were responsible for them. Increasingly now, news relies on freelancers, and freelancers, I mean, a whole bunch of them have just been made up, a bunch of very young freelancers set off to Libya and done great work, and they're now moving up the ladders, but they're freelancers. They go there with no support. I was a freelancer. I went to Iraq in 2003 with absolutely no support, with just enough pre-commissions to pay for the trip there and come back.
And now you're thinking of the civilians that live there, that send you stuff.
And the civilians also who
How do you keep them? How do they know to send you things without getting found out?
So in Iran, it changes. Unfortunately, it's sort of country by country and approach by approach. But in Iran, what we did was we set up anonymous Google accounts, and the problem with Iran was also internet. So we tried to use proxy services like Tor, which will dissimulate your IP address of where you are. So the problem with that was that internet, it slows down internet even further, so it was very hard to do. Unfortunately, what we've all seen is while technology is a very, very powerful tool of state, as far as in Tunisia, for example, in January, as everything was kicking off, the Tunisian state sent a whole, tried to disable, try to get stuck into all Facebook communications in Tunisia by using a man-in-the-middle attack, which lies to both partners, etc. There's a lot of tech work which is being done by governments, etc. Actually, most people, we had 2 of our Iranian contributors were arrested subsequently about a year later. They'd been caught because they had co-posted pictures that they put on Demotix onto their Facebook profile. And So we'd anonymise them on Demotix, and this is the case with both of them, in fact. But they wouldn't have gone to jail because they posted these things on their Facebook profile. Also, we were told. But what the problem was that they were deemed to be reporting for a foreign news organisation because they put those pictures on Demotix as well. But there, it's sort of case by case. What we did then was we were in touch with their families, and they said, just don't come anywhere near us. Let us deal with this all by ourselves. And then there's something which I'm sure many of you know about, which is that the reporters were granted bail to the equivalent value of the mortgage of the family's house, which is a very fair way of making sure that you're incentivized not to do that anymore. And that's the case that happened with both of these. So it is sort of case by case. What we do is we make sure that technically we anonymize absolutely everything if we need to on Demotix. And then try and figure out what we do with the consequences. Our reporters have been injured. How do you deal with that, etc. It's not at all clear. We really don't have the answer, and we've looked at a series of potential answers, like building mass co-insurance policies that we could get down to a price which would work. Nobody's figured it out yet. And in the meantime, it's extremely dangerous and it's getting worse for freelance reporters and it's low cost. So thank you for the question.
Two more questions. Yeah.
What's the incentive then for reporters to send you their work currently if they're not being paid for it?
Well, they are. So you are in Benin and you've just shot a fantastic story about you do something or other, political politics, and send it to Demotix. When we sell it into the Guardian, you'll get 50% of anything that we make. So 50% stays with Demotix, which keeps us on our feet, and 50% goes to you, and ideally incentivize you to go take pictures.
Right, but only if it gets
Exactly.
sold on. And another question, if that's okay. Given that you're sort of a different media form, have you had mainstream media copy some of this, steal some of his stories to which you've got to then go after them for?
Daily.
Right, because I thought that might be the case,
Yeah.
and then you'd be constantly in legal pursuit of them.
Well, there's legal and there's we have currently an ongoing dispute with a Bangladeshi online newspaper and an Ukrainian online newspaper. I don't speak particularly good Bengali, and my Ukrainian is terrible. So at a certain point you say, but when RPT, which is the Portuguese BBC, took a whole bunch of our content, then we puff out our chests and go and pretend that we know what lawyers are. But yeah, it's you figure out, you negotiate as much as you possibly can. Yeah, it happens, of course, yeah. There's one more question. Yeah,
I'm very interested in, I've always thought about Iran in particular, that if you compare the situation for photojournalists here in Britain and in America now, you know, photographers are selling like their photographs to like Rolling Stone website for 50p. And then you look at Iran and you see how important photojournalism is. And it's just sort of interesting that this kind of forum that was at one time so important here, investigative journalism was so important here, has been totally devalued. And then you see like, you know, what you're doing, and also you look at the sort of what is coming out of Iran, how important photojournalism is. So I'm sort of wondering, I guess my question is vaguely about the importance of the image and where is that going and what will happen to it?
I don't understand that it's huge. It's about as powerful thing to get. It's immediate. It tells a story. It brings you there. It communicates quicker and more immediately and more powerfully than anything else. If the blasted mainstream news organisations figured out their business models, we would have hologrammatized picture galleries on our websites today. They just haven't. And oh dears. So the problem there has been this.
So is it them? Is it that it's their problem they haven't figured it out, or is it somehow our problem that we want to look at pelicans here instead of really
We want to look at
life? We want to look at pelicans here in the UK instead of what life is really like.
There are a few exceptions. So as I ranted, I felt guilty. The New York Times has something called the Lens blog, which if none of you have seen is absolutely stunning. They do extraordinary, fantastic daily images, and the big picture at the Boston Globe does fantastic things like that as well. And Eyewitness from the Guardian on the iPad does great images, etc., etc. Do we have the kind of photojournalistic, investigative stories that Life magazine used to do, or that you can find in Esquire or in the 50s? No, we don't at all. And this is something that Shumon was talking about earlier, which is, are we drowned by too much content? Can we deal with long form, whether it's verbal or pictures? And it sounds like we can't. Although this, you hear about the tablets being the savior of all forms of entertainment, news, etc., etc. It's not. But one thing that they have figured out is that people look at their tablets for a much longer period of time, and in the evening, after a glass of wine. So, or 8. If you work in the news media today, drowning your sorrows. But so yes, maybe we'll learn how to do long form again. But that from personal anecdotal experience, no, I can't do long form anymore. I've got too much to do anything properly.
Can you consume it?
That's what I mean. No, I can't.
You can either produce it.
I can certainly can't produce it. But I also find it. Yeah, no, I find it. I think everybody finds it much harder to change pace, and I think that's the cultural shift. If you look, there's a pace change. We expect information very quickly. We digest it. I remember somebody telling me about growing illiteracy rates in the UK amongst the young. This is about 6 months ago. I can't remember the numbers. Thank goodness, they were very high, and they shocked me. And I said, I said to them, but this is rubbish. Everybody spends all their time on the web. You can't not read to stay on the web. And this person said that you're not reading, and they're looking. You can identify here. You look at this page. You can identify that the yellow button is probably a call to action. You can identify certain bits to click. When you can click, you can navigate and do most of the stuff. You're not really reading. And I thought this was outrageous, absurd, and pathetic. And I think I do exactly the same thing.
Can I just quickly interject? You mentioned how pamphlets were being printed again, and I read that people just picked up the telephone in Egypt when the internet shut down. So, and people in Tahrir Square engaging in very long, politically drawn out discussions. It seems like long form seems to have a place when the specific circumstances necessitate having those discussions and engaging. And to me it seems like, is it because we're just so busy that we feel that we don't have that time, and we don't make that time? That the media, that we're now sort of snippets that are there, but actually when the time necessitates that we have those discussions, people actually do deeply engage in those discussions, and for days and weeks in the case of Egypt. And how should the media then respond to those new setups and circumstances? It's sort of an open question, but I think there is a need for investigative journalism, but it's just that people feel as if we don't have the time, or we can't make that time.
Yeah, it's probably the most important journalism there is. My sense of the biggest blind spot in the journalism is terrible. I'll tell a stupid story and I promise to shut up. But I remember going to Afghanistan with a friend of mine, having played around with being a journalist a little bit, and we decided that we were going to go to try to understand how business worked. And I went to Afghanistan with this close friend, and we went to meet the Minister of Mines and Engineering in Kabul, who told us everything, because this friend of mine was doing business and came there with proper financial backing. And the Minister of Mines told him not only everything, but also told us information which was absolutely mind-blowing, all related to the Karzai clan and who owned which exploration licenses across the country. Mind-blowing stuff. I also, when I was there, floating around, spoke to 3 separate people, including the head of the World Bank's mission there, the person who was in charge of all the oil stuff in Afghanistan, and a big Afghan businessman, who all told me that Zalmay Khalilzad, the US envoy to Afghanistan, who then went back, who was ambassador in Iraq as well, and who's gone back to Washington in the major shareholders of one of the biggest private companies in Afghanistan. I came back and called somebody called Jason Burke, who's a special correspondent for the Observer. I called him and said, I have this really fascinating stuff about Zalmay. What are you going to do about it? And he said, he said, yeah, it's fine. They told you. What happens to me? I go over there and no one tell me anything at all. I'm a journalist. So, perfect case of blind spot. Journalists are very bad at getting certain kinds of information. And the only way you get that information is by complicated research and long form, well, a lot of work, investigative work. And now we don't do it anymore at all. And now's really the time to do it.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Will you please join